We heard in our second reading that beautiful passage about love. And if you've been to a Catholic wedding, chances are that was, the second reading. And it's a beautiful passage. I think when we hear that, it's kind of this is very nice. And it's also, this passage is kind of a portrait of who Jesus is. Like wherever it says love, you could also replace Jesus' name in that passage, right? So Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus is not jealous. He is not pompous. He is not inflated. He is not rude. He does not seek his own interests. He is not quick-tempered. He does not brood over injury. He does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. Jesus bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Jesus never fails. And so we hear this passage, and Jesus, who not only fills this portrait perfectly, but he is the God who is love, he comes walking into a synagogue and he's rejected. How on earth do you reconcile those two things? If this is who Jesus is, who wouldn't accept him? And I think part of the mystery of why Jesus was rejected is really the distorted beliefs that we have about love. Not just ideas about love, but really what we believe about love in our hearts. And the people in the synagogue, whatever their hardness of heart was, had something to do with the distorted idea or distorted beliefs of what love actually is. I was with the seventh graders talking about this very passage earlier this week, and I started out the class just asking each of them to complete this sentence: I love blank. And I got all kinds of responses from I love God, I love my family, I love my friends, I love the Bucks, I love the Lightning, I love my pets. I think my favorite was I love that part of the cream-filled donut after you get past the green to the other side of the donut. I was like, all right, man, that's... But you see that, like, I love God and I love donuts. There's something really strange about that. The love for God and the love for donuts is very different. God is, when we talk about love, there's kind of this, there's a problem in the language, right? And really, I think it's helpful kind of considering the New Testament, remembering that it was written in Greek. And the Greek had 4 different words for love. 4 different kinds of love, right? And so when St. Paul and when Jesus and the other New Testament writers are writing about love, they use one specific word. I'll come back to that, but I'll tell you about the first 3. So, one word for love is storge. And storge is the kind of love that you have for members of your family. We might actually see that in the gospel when the people recognize Jesus. Hey, isn't this Joseph's boy? Isn't this the son of Joseph? Right? They probably had a sort of familiar love for him. But that's what storge is. It's the sort of affectionate love that you see in a family. And then there's also philia. Right? We know Philadelphia, called the city of brotherly love, because philia, that first part of the word, means fraternal love, the love that's shared between friends, the love that's shared between peers. The third word for love is eros. Right? The Greek god Eros, his Roman name, of course, is Cupid. Right? We know what happens when people get shot with Cupid's arrows. Right? They fall in love. That's eros. Right? The love of desire. We usually think of it just in terms of kind of a romantic love, but it's actually much broader. It's the love of desire. I think the guy's love for that part of the donut would be considered an eros love, right? But the fourth word for love, and this is the word that's used in the New Testament, is agape. Agape. And agape basically means to will the good of the other. To will the good of the other. Not just to wish the good of the other, but to will the good of the other. To do good to another. And that's the word that's being used in this passage. That's the word that's used when John writes, God is love. God is agape. Right? If you notice those other three kinds of loves, they're very natural loves that kind of just spontaneously happen. Right? There's a spontaneous love for members of the family. There's this natural love for your friends. There's this natural love for those you fall in love with, and for donuts. But agape, it includes that, but it also goes beyond it, and it also elevates it. Right? Agape love is what keeps those other three loves pure and keeps them from being corrupted. Because each of those three kind of natural loves that we all experience, they can actually be distorted. Right? The familiar love in the gospel actually kept the people from accepting Jesus as more than just, a guy from their neighborhood. Right? We see, helicopter parents, that's a distortion of storge love. We see terrible criminal things with eros love, right? We also see with the friendship love how peer pressure can often be a terrible thing. When your friends are doing something that isn't right, well, agape love would tell you not to go with that. But sometimes that friendship love, might suggest otherwise. But agape love keeps those loves pure. But not only does it keep those natural loves pure, agape is something that God commands even for our enemies. That we are to agape love our enemies. And there is no natural, spontaneous love for our enemies. If there was, they wouldn't be our enemies. Right? But God commands us to love our enemies, to will the good of our enemies. And so, with all of that in mind, we can kind of come back to that portrait of Jesus and remember how he had a love for his family, right? He experienced that storge love. He had love for his friends, for his disciples. And he even had eros love. His going to the cross was because he desires each one of us. He went to the cross with this desire for each of us. But we also remember that it was ultimately agape love that drove him to the cross. His desire to do the greatest good for us, to win our salvation. We remember that what St. Paul wrote in Romans, that while we were still his enemies, he loved us. He showed his love for us by going to the cross. You know, when he's there on the cross and he's nailed to the wood of the cross, he could have easily commanded the armies of angels to come to his aid and to save him and to crush his enemies. Just a simple nod of his head, and they would have come rushing to his aid. But he wasn't commanding the armies of angels. He was pleading to his Father for the very men who were nailing him to the cross, who were insulting him and mocking him, who had rejected him, who were taunting him and insulting him. He was pleading for them. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. That is agape love. And so when we read 1 Corinthians 13 about love, we have the portrait of 1 Corinthians 13 right here on the cross. Jesus is patient. Jesus is kind. Jesus is not jealous. He is not pompous. He is not inflated. He is not rude. He does not seek his own interests. He is not quick-tempered. He does not brood over injury. He does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. He bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Jesus never fails. And so confronted with the hardness of the hearts of those in the gospel, and even with our own hardness of heart, let's reflect on the God who is love and who revealed himself as love right here on the cross. And let that speak to our hardness of heart. Let it pierce our hardness of heart. Let it break it down. And let it renew our hearts in the true love of God, the God who is love, the God who is agape.